The road can feel routine, just another drive, another set of headlights in the distance, another stretch of asphalt under the tires. But sometimes, in a split second, everything changes. Dash cams, meant to capture accidents for insurance or security, have instead recorded some of the most shocking and unsettling moments ever caught on camera. In this video, we're looking at 5 of the most disturbing deaths ever captured on dashcam footage. Incidents so unexpected and intense that they still leave viewers shaken to this day.
Security camera footage from on board, just released by Chinese authorities, shows the passenger shouting at the driver, smacking him with her cell phone, and the driver fighting back.
It was the morning of October 28, 2018, in the Wanzhou district of Chongqing, China. At exactly 10:02 a.m., a public bus rolled onto the second Yangtze River Bridge. Inside were 15 people, including the driver, ordinary passengers on what should have been an ordinary ride. Some stared out the windows. Some looked at their phones. Others simply waited for their stop. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing felt dangerous. But in less than a minute, that quiet bus ride would turn into a nightmare no one could escape. The bus moved steadily across the bridge, high above the dark waters of the Yangtze River. Cars passed in the opposite direction. The city hummed in the distance. Then, suddenly, the vehicle jerked. It swerved into the wrong lane, narrowly missing an oncoming car. Before anyone could even process what was happening, the bus slammed into the concrete guardrail. The barrier shattered. The entire vehicle tipped forward and plunged nearly 50 meters, about 164 feet, straight into the river below. One moment, it was on the bridge. The next, it was gone. Witnesses froze in shock. Some said the driver must have tried to avoid a car. Others thought the brakes had failed. Rescue teams rushed to the scene, but deep down, many already feared the worst. The water at that point of the river was more than 70 meters deep, cold, dark, and unforgiving. There was almost no chance anyone inside had survived. For hours, no one truly knew what had caused the disaster. It took days of dangerous underwater work before a massive crane could finally lift the bus from the depths. When it emerged, the truth began to surface as well. Inside, investigators recovered the black box, and what they found shocked the entire country. Just moments before the crash, a 48-year-old passenger named Lu realized she had missed her stop. Frustrated, she demanded the driver pull over immediately. The driver, a 42-year-old man named Ran, refused. He calmly told her the bus could only stop at designated stations. It was a routine rule, something drivers said every day. But this time, the argument didn't end there. Their voices grew louder. The tension spread through the bus. Passengers looked up, unsure of what to do. Then, suddenly, Lu struck the driver with her phone. The impact was sharp and unexpected. Ran, still steering with one hand, reacted. He tried to defend himself, swinging his right arm back toward her. The struggle lasted only seconds, but those seconds were all it took. In the chaos, the steering wheel jerked hard to the left. The bus veered into oncoming traffic. A car swerved to avoid it. Tires screeched. Then came the deafening crash as the bus smashed through the concrete barrier. And just like that, it disappeared over the edge. The last sound recorded inside the vehicle wasn't the impact. It was the sound of passengers screaming. When the bus was finally recovered on October 31st, 13 bodies were found inside. 2 passengers were never recovered, swallowed by the river's depths. All 15 lives on board were gone. Police reviewed more than 2,300 hours of surveillance footage and combined it with the black box data. The conclusion was undeniable. The disaster was caused by the fight between the passenger and the driver. Authorities later released a short clip from the bus camera. It showed Lu striking Ran. It showed his reaction. And then, almost instantly, the fatal swerve. The video spread across social media, watched by millions. Some blamed Lu for attacking the driver. Others said Ran should have ignored her and kept control of the wheel. But in the end, the result was the same. 15 people paid the price for a confrontation that lasted less than a minute.
So all he can do now is just come to the place where he last was.
Andrea Silva leaving flowers at the monument honoring her uncle, killed in the station nightclub fire.
On the night of February 20th, 2003, No one walking into the station nightclub in West Warwick, Rhode Island, thought they were stepping into history, let alone into a nightmare. Friends laughed, drinks were raised, and the room buzzed with anticipation as hundreds of fans packed in to see Jack Russell's Great White take the stage. What none of them knew was that within minutes, celebration would turn into sheer terror, and the entire world would later watch it happen on video. At 11:07 p.m., the band launched into their opening song, Desert Moon. The crowd surged forward, shoulder to shoulder. 462 people crammed into a space licensed for far fewer. Then, in a split second, everything changed. Tour manager Daniel Bichel ignited 4 pyrotechnic devices designed to spray sparks above the stage. 2 shot outward at an angle, 2 straight up. The sparks looked harmless at first, almost routine, until they touched the foam lining the walls and ceiling behind the drummer. The flames didn't creep, they exploded. Fire raced upward in seconds, licking across the ceiling like it was being pulled by an unseen force. At first, some people clapped, thinking it was part of the show, but then thick black smoke began pouring down, burning eyes and stealing breath. The music stopped. Screams replaced cheers. Panic set in as the reality hit. This wasn't a performance. This was a fire, and it was spreading impossibly fast. Instinct took over. Most of the crowd turned toward the front entrance, the way they had come in, but the narrow hallway became a death trap almost instantly. Bodies pressed together. People tripped, fell, and were crushed as others pushed from behind, desperate for air. Movement slowed, then stopped entirely. Those trapped inside the bottleneck screamed for help as smoke filled their lungs. Some tried the stage door, only to find it blocked, reportedly reserved for the band. A few found other exits, an employee-only door, a bar exit. Others smashed windows at the front of the building, clawing their way out through broken glass. But for many, there was nowhere to go. The heat intensified. The smoke grew thicker. The room became unrecognizable in moments. All of it was captured on camera. Local news videographer Brian Butler had been inside the club filming a segment on nightclub safety. His footage shows the chaos unfolding in real time. People stacked on top of one another, crawling, collapsing, gasping for breath as visibility dropped to almost nothing. At one point, Butler put the camera down and began helping people escape, kicking out windows to create openings. The fire continued to rage behind him. Within minutes, the building was completely engulfed. There was no sprinkler system to slow the flames. The fire alarm wasn't properly connected. The West Warwick Fire Department began receiving frantic 911 calls within 60 seconds of the fire starting. Crews arrived just 6 minutes later, joined by firefighters from surrounding towns. But by then, the damage was irreversible. By 1:30 a.m., the fire was under control. What remained was devastation. When the smoke cleared, the scale of the loss was almost impossible to comprehend. 100 people were dead. Among them were 4 employees, the band's guitarist Ty Longley and local DJ Mike Gonsalves. More than 230 others were injured, many with severe burns and permanent physical damage. Only 132 people walked away without injury. Survivors carried not just scars, but memories, many later diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, haunted by the sounds, the heat, and the faces they couldn't forget. The investigations that followed uncovered a chain of fatal failures. Highly flammable polyurethane foam lined the walls. The club was overcrowded. Pyrotechnics had been used without proper authorization. There was no sprinkler system. What had worked safely at other venues became deadly inside that room. Criminal charges and civil lawsuits followed. Bichelet pleaded guilty to 100 counts of involuntary manslaughter. The club's owners accepted plea deals. Civil settlements totaled $176 million, yet no court ruling could undo what happened in those few minutes.
And if you want something to happen to you
It was July 15, 1989, during a live broadcast of the BBC children's show UP2U from Manchester. The program had the familiar energy of a Saturday morning. Lively hosts, fun segments, and a young audience expecting nothing more than light-hearted entertainment. 26-year-old presenter Anthea Turner was seated casually on the tailgate of a van. smiling and ready to introduce a motorcycle stunt team performing as part of a promotion for the Royal Tournament. Around her, the atmosphere felt controlled, rehearsed, and safe. But behind the scenes, something had gone terribly wrong. As Turner began speaking, a stunt rider misunderstood her cue. What should have been a simple introduction was mistaken for the signal to launch. In an instant, the motorcycle surged forward and the pyrotechnics ignited, while Turner was still sitting just inches away. The explosion came without warning. Flames burst outward, catching her hair, jacket, and hands. The force of the blast, combined with the movement of the rider's arm, knocked her directly into the path of the pyrotechnics. Within seconds, she was on fire, on live television, while the cameras continued to roll. Viewers across the country watched in disbelief as the cheerful children's show turned into a scene of panic. Turner scrambled away from the flames, rolling on the ground in a desperate attempt to put out the fire spreading across her clothes. The shock of the moment was almost as overwhelming as the physical pain. This wasn't a rehearsal. There was no chance to cut away in time. It was all happening in real time, right in front of millions of people. She suffered burns to her head and hands, along with temporary hearing loss from the blast. For a few terrifying seconds, it had looked as though the accident could be fatal. Instead, the program hastily cut to co-presenter Jenny Powell, who tried to steady her voice as she assured viewers that Turner was receiving first aid and was alive, but the damage had already been done. The cheerful tone of the morning was gone, replaced by a sense of shock that lingered long after the broadcast ended. An investigation later revealed that the accident was caused by a breakdown in communication between the production team and the stunt organizers. A simple misunderstanding, just a split-second mistake, had placed Turner dangerously close to the pyrotechnic effects at exactly the wrong moment. The injuries forced her to step away from work while she recovered. Several layers of skin on her hands had been burned, leaving lasting discoloration. She lost patches of hair, along with her eyebrows and eyelashes. Even after healing, the scars remained, physical reminders of how close she had come to something far worse. Despite everything, Turner later said she considered herself lucky to be alive. The accident could easily have ended in tragedy. The incident also left a lasting mark on the show and the BBC itself. It happened during the very first episode of UP2U's second series, and the program ended its run later that year. In the aftermath, Turner became a prominent voice for health and safety awareness, even appearing in BBC training videos. Her own experience serving as a stark example of what can go wrong when the live television meets dangerous stunts.
Phoenix police released body camera of the Two officers were responding to a 911 call when Brian Whitaker opened the door with a gun in his hand.
In May 2020, a late-night knock at an apartment door in Phoenix, Arizona, turned into a fatal encounter that lasted only a few seconds. Police had been called to the complex after a neighbor complained about loud noises and possible domestic violence coming from inside one of the units. It sounded serious enough to send officers to the scene, but what was actually happening inside the apartment was far less dramatic. Brian Whitaker, a 40-year-old man, was at home with his girlfriend, the two of them playing video games and talking loudly, unaware that their evening had already triggered a chain of events that would end in tragedy. The neighbor had called 911 twice that night, growing increasingly frustrated with the noise. In the second call, the complaint was escalated to suggest a possible violent fight, which pushed the dispatch status to a higher emergency level. By the time officers were sent out, they believed they might be responding to a domestic disturbance rather than a simple noise complaint. When officers arrived around 10:52 p.m., they positioned themselves on either side of Whitaker's front door, out of view of the peephole. From inside, there was no clear sign that police were standing there. When the knock came, Whitaker approached the door with a handgun at his side. His girlfriend later said there had been suspicious knocks earlier that week, so he carried the weapon as a precaution. Music was playing inside, and it's possible he never clearly heard the officers announce themselves. He opened the door expecting the unknown, not realizing armed officers were waiting just outside. The moment the door swung open, everything accelerated. A flashlight shined directly into his eyes. One of the officers suddenly shouted, "Hands! Hands! Hands!" Whitaker appeared startled, his voice rising in panic as he said, "Whoa! Whoa! Whoa!" Realizing it was the police. Almost instantly, he began lowering the gun toward the floor and dropping to his knees, raising his other hand in surrender. The weapon slipped from his grip as he tried to comply. But before he could fully finish the motion, shots rang out. In the span of just a few seconds, the officer fired, striking Whitaker twice in the back. He collapsed to the floor. When his hand came back into view, it was empty. The gun lay behind him inside the apartment, out of reach. The entire encounter, from the door opening to the gunfire, had lasted roughly 5 seconds. Moments later, Whitaker's girlfriend rushed out, confused and horrified, asking why he had been shot. The officer replied that Whitaker had pulled a gun on them. In the body cam footage, another officer later remarked that he likely would have done the same thing if his partner hadn't fired first. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that there were no obvious signs of a violent fight inside the apartment, and some officers at the scene even suggested the neighbor may have exaggerated the call to speed up the response. Still, the emergency classification had already set the tone for the officer's approach. When the body cam video was finally released more than a month later, it spread quickly online. Many viewers were disturbed by how fast the situation escalated and how Whitaker appeared to be surrendering when he was shot. Protests followed, and his family demanded criminal charges against the officer, along with disciplinary action for others involved in the response. In the end, prosecutors declined to file criminal charges. The officer was initially set to be fired, but the termination was later reduced to a suspension. The city ultimately approved a $3 million settlement with Whitaker's family, and additional legal settlements followed in later years. For many who watched the footage, the most unsettling part wasn't just the outcome, it was the speed. One knock, one door opening, a few shouted words, and in less than 5 seconds a man was dead inside his own home, leaving behind a question that still lingers. How did a simple noise complaint turn into a fatal police shooting? It was August 10, 2016, on the A34 near Newbury in Berkshire. A family was heading home after a summer camping trip. They were tired, a little sunburned, but happy. Just before getting back on the road, they had eaten together, hugged, and said their goodbyes. The children were still joking and teasing each other. No one knew those would be the last moments they'd ever share. In a small Vauxhall Corsa, 45-year-old Tracy Houghton drove with 3 children inside. Her sons, 13-year-old Ethan and 11-year-old Josh, and 11-year-old Amy Goldsmith, her partner's daughter. Close behind, in a Vauxhall Zafira, was Tracy's partner Mark Goldsmith with his 13-year-old son, Jake. The 2 cars stayed close as they moved through heavy traffic, heading home to Dunstable. Traffic on the A34 was slow that afternoon. Long lines of vehicles crawled forward. Tracy's Corsa slowed with the flow, and Mark's car followed at a safe distance. Further back, a 30-year-old lorry driver named Tomasz Kroker approached in his 19-ton truck. Inside his cab were 2 cameras, one pointed at the road, the other at him. For nearly 7 seconds, he wasn't looking at the road at all. He was scrolling through music on his phone. At 50 miles per hour, his lorry covered more than 150 meters in that time. Then he looked up. The change in his face was instant. Realization, fear. He dropped the phone and tried to react, but it was already too late. In less than a second, the lorry slammed into traffic ahead, triggering a violent chain reaction. The force pushed straight into Tracy's Corsa. The small car was crushed beneath another lorry, reduced to a fraction of its size. Tracy, Ethan, Josh, and Amy were killed instantly. Just behind them, Mark and Jake felt the impact as their own car was shoved into the wreckage. Mark later described the moment he realized which car was ahead of him. He stood on the road holding Jake, who had just lost his sister and his closest friends in seconds. At first, Kroker claimed his brakes had failed and said he had only been listening to the radio. But dash cam footage told the truth. It showed him scrolling through his phone moments before the crash. Hours earlier, he had signed a promise to his employer that he wouldn't use his phone while driving. The crash caused an 8-vehicle pileup and seriously injured another driver. In court, Kroker admitted to 4 counts of causing death by dangerous driving and 1 count of causing serious injury. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison and banned from driving for 7 more. The judge said his actions were like driving with his eyes closed. For the families, the punishment changed nothing. Mark and Jake had been right behind their loved ones, forced to witness the moment everything was taken away. 4 lives, Tracy, Ethan, Josh, and Amy, gone in seconds, all because one driver looked at his phone instead of the road.
You can see it. There it is. I can't.
The fight took place on June 28th at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. Mike Tyson, once the most feared man in boxing, was stepping back into the ring to reclaim the WBA heavyweight title he had lost the year before. In their first bout, Evander Holyfield had stunned the world by controlling the fight and knocking Tyson down before finishing him in the 11th round. Now, the rematch carried enormous pressure. Tyson wanted redemption. Holyfield wanted to prove the first victory was no fluke. Millions tuned in, expecting fireworks, but not the kind that were about to unfold. From the opening bell, the tension was obvious. Holyfield looked sharp and composed, landing clean punches and controlling the pace. Tyson, known for his explosive aggression, seemed increasingly frustrated. There were repeated clashes of heads during the fight, and in the second round, one of those collisions opened a cut over Tyson's right eye. Referee Mills Lane ruled it accidental, but it only seemed to fuel Tyson's anger. You could feel it through the screen, the irritation, the boiling frustration, the sense that something wasn't right. When the third round began, Tyson left his corner without his mouthpiece, forcing the referee to step in and delay the action. It was a small moment, but it felt like a warning sign. Seconds later, the fight exploded into chaos. During a clinch, with both men locked together, Tyson suddenly lunged forward and bit down on Holyfield's right ear. The crowd gasped. For a split second, it didn't even seem real. Then, Holyfield spun away in pain, blood visible, a piece of cartilage torn from his ear. Tyson spatted onto the canvas. Ringside officials rushed in. The arena, once roaring with excitement, fell into a stunned, confused noise that sounded more like disbelief than cheering. After a brief pause and a consultation with the ringside doctor, the fight was allowed to continue, but the tension was unbearable now. Everyone watching knew something had snapped, and then, unbelievably, it happened again. In another clinch, Tyson bit Holyfield's other ear, leaving a deep wound. At that point, there was no coming back. Referee Mills Lane stepped in and disqualified Tyson, ending the fight and marking the first heavyweight title disqualification in more than half a century. But the chaos didn't stop there. Tyson, still furious, tried to confront members of Holyfield's team near the ring. Security had to step in multiple times to keep the situation from escalating further. The consequences were immediate. The Nevada State Athletic Commission revoked Tyson's boxing license and fined him $3 million. Though his license was later reinstated, the incident permanently altered the way people saw him. Holyfield, despite the gruesome injury, recovered and later publicly forgave Tyson, showing a level of composure that contrasted sharply with the violence of that night. The fight generated around $180 million in revenue, but the numbers hardly mattered. No one remembered the event for its athleticism or its competition. They remembered the bite. Years later, Tyson admitted that in the heat of the moment he had lost control completely. He even confessed that he had felt an overwhelming urge to seriously harm Holyfield, describing a rage that consumed his judgment.
Responding to a call, gets out of his car and seconds later fatally shoots the 16-year-old girl.
In April 2021, a frantic 911 call brought police racing to a home in southeast Columbus, Ohio. The caller said there were girls outside trying to fight, maybe even stab someone. It sounded like chaos, but no one knew just how fast things were about to spiral out of control. When officers pulled up, the situation was already boiling over in the driveway. Several people were shouting, pushing, and circling each other. There was no time to slow things down, no time to ask questions. 16-year-old Makaya Bryant suddenly appeared in the middle of the chaos, a knife in her hand. Within seconds, the scene turned from a heated argument into a life-or-death confrontation. Body cam footage shows the officer stepping out of his cruiser, barely able to process what he's seeing. People are moving in different directions. Someone falls, another person shouts, and then, in one rapid motion, Bryant charges toward another girl and pins her against a car. raising the knife. The officer yells for her to get down, his voice sharp and urgent. But the distance between them is only a few steps, and the blade is already in motion. In that split second, with another life hanging in the balance, he fires 4 shots. The sound echoes through the neighborhood. Bryant collapses onto the pavement, motionless. Officers rush to her side almost immediately, trying to give first aid as the reality of what just happened settles in. Paramedics arrive, and she's taken to the hospital in critical condition. A short time later, she's pronounced dead. She was only 16 years old. When the body cam footage was released, it spread across the internet within hours. Some viewers said the officer's actions likely prevented another stabbing, arguing that he had only seconds to react. Others were outraged that a teenager lost her life in such a violent, public way, calling it another example of excessive force. Protests broke out in Columbus and other cities, and the case quickly became part of a larger national debate about policing, race, and the use of deadly force. An investigation followed, and the case eventually went before a grand jury. After reviewing the footage and evidence, the grand jury declined to charge the officer, ruling that the shooting was legally justified because it stopped an imminent threat. But for many people watching the video, the legal outcome didn't erase the emotional impact. The footage shows a confrontation that lasted only seconds, yet ended a young life forever, leaving behind a question that still divides opinions to this day. Was it a necessary act to save another, or a tragedy that should have ended differently? It was the evening of August 27, 2022, in Ferntree Gully, a quiet suburb on the outer edge of Melbourne. Inside a silver Saab sat 39-year-old Nicole Woolard. She was in the passenger seat, relaxed, trusting the person behind the wheel, her friend, 45-year-old Matthew Dyer. To her, it was just another ride through familiar streets. There was no warning, no sign that within minutes her life would be over. Up the road, police radar picked up the Saab traveling at 94 kilometers per hour in a 60 zone. One officer muttered, "He's going," as they made a quick U-turn to follow. The patrol car's lights and sirens came on, a clear signal for the driver to pull over. But instead of slowing down, Dyer pressed the accelerator. He never should have been driving in the first place. His license had expired nearly a decade earlier. The Saab wasn't registered, and the plates on it had been stolen. He was already on bail for theft, false registration, and drug-related charges. His record was filled with reckless driving and substance issues, and that day, he was heavily impaired. A later blood test revealed high levels of methamphetamine and alcohol in his system. Experts would confirm the combination left him unable to think clearly or safely control a vehicle. Yet, he was speeding through crowded streets with Nicole sitting just inches away. As police followed, his speed climbed, 110, 15, then 159 kilometers per hour down Ferntree Gully Road, an 80 zone. The road was full of families, commuters, and workers heading home. The danger was obvious. Realizing how risky the pursuit had become, one officer made the decision to call it off. Over the radio, a female officer asked for the air wing to take over instead. They didn't want the chase to end in disaster, but it was already too late. Just seconds later, at the intersection of Ferntree Gully Road and Camden Park Parade, the Saab approached a red light. Cars were crossing legally on green. Drivers had no idea a vehicle was about to blast through the intersection at nearly 160 kilometers per hour. Dyer didn't slow down. The Saab tore through the red light and slammed into an SUV carrying a mother and her daughter. The impact was so violent it spun the Saab into a nearby ute. Dashcam footage captured the moment of collision. Metal twisting, glass exploding, vehicles thrown across the road like toys. Witnesses later said the scene looked like a war zone. Debris was scattered everywhere. Fluids covered the asphalt. One driver described parts of the wreckage raining down onto their car, with a bumper landing near their wheel. By chance, an ambulance had been stopped at the red light just meters away. Paramedics rushed in immediately. Nicole was trapped in the passenger seat with catastrophic injuries. There was nothing they could do. She died at the scene. Dyer had been ejected from the Saab. Despite a severe head injury, he managed to get to his feet. CCTV footage showed him wandering around, dazed. He glanced briefly at the wreckage, then walked away, leaving Nicole behind inside the car. Only an hour earlier, she had hugged her daughter for what would become the last time. The mother and child in the SUV were badly injured but survived. The driver of the ute, against all odds, walked away unharmed. Police, who had already called off the chase, arrived moments later to a scene of chaos and devastation. What had started as a routine traffic stop had turned deadly in less than a minute. Blood tests confirmed just how impaired Dyer had been. His decisions, fleeing, speeding, running the red light, were directly linked to his condition. In March 2023, he pleaded guilty to culpable driving, causing death and reckless conduct endangering life. He offered no cooperation during his arrest. Later that year, he was sentenced to more than 10 years in prison, with a non-parole period of 7.5 years. He was also banned from driving for 8 years after his release. Television viewers across Italy expected an ordinary news update in 2024. Another brief report about a death in a quiet town. The kind of story that usually fades after a few minutes. But what unfolded on live television that day was something far more disturbing. It was the kind of moment that makes people freeze in front of their screens, unsure whether what they're watching is really happening. Within minutes, routine reporting turned into a real-time confession, and millions of viewers found themselves witnessing a tragedy far more intimate and far more chilling than anyone could have imagined. The story began in the small town of Spezzano di Fiorano, in the province of Modena. On a quiet Sunday, 80-year-old Loretta Lini was found dead in her bed by her daughter. Loretta had been living with dementia and Alzheimer's, illnesses that had slowly eroded her memory and independence, placing an increasing burden on those around her. Police quickly suspected foul play, and attention turned to her 50-year-old son, Lorenzo Carbone, who had been her primary caregiver for more than 15 years. Carbone had disappeared after the incident, prompting a search across the surrounding areas. Officers and drones scanned the nearby town of Pavullo, where he had reportedly gone after leaving the house. Later, he would say he hadn't been hiding, just wandering the streets, trying to escape the weight of what had happened, trying to put distance between himself and the scene. But fate had something else planned. When Carbone returned to his mother's home the next day, he ran straight into a television crew from the talk show Pomeriggio 5, who were already there covering the developing story. Cameras were rolling, microphones were out, and suddenly, the man at the center of the investigation was standing in front of them. He looked confused, exhausted, and emotionally shattered. Reporter Fabio Giuffrida asked him a few questions, likely expecting denials or vague answers. Instead, Carbone did something no one anticipated. He confessed. On live television, in front of a rolling camera, he began describing what had happened. His voice trembled as he spoke about trying to suffocate his mother with a pillow and pillowcase. Then, in halting, emotional fragments, he admitted he had used shoelaces to end her life. He said the strain of caregiving, the repetitive behaviors, the unpredictability of her condition had pushed him past his limits. He said he couldn't take it anymore. He said he acted in a moment of desperation, even though he knew exactly what he was doing. As he spoke, he broke down again and again, his words tangled in grief, anger, and regret. It wasn't the composed statement of a suspect. It was a raw, emotional unraveling, broadcast live into millions of homes. The reporter, stunned by what he had just heard, immediately contacted the Carabinieri. Officers arrived quickly and arrested Carbone. But by then, the moment had already gone out to the entire country. The confession, the breakdown, the arrest, it all aired live on Canal 5, anchored by journalist Murda Merlino. The reaction was immediate and intense. Viewers were shocked. Media professionals were outraged. Many questioned whether it was ethical to broadcast such a confession in real time, especially when the man on camera was visibly distressed and confused. Some called it a new low for television. Others described it as a media circus that crossed the line between journalism and exploitation. As Carbone was taken into custody and Loretta's body prepared for autopsy, the broadcast itself became part of the story. What began as a simple news report ended as one of the most unsettling live moments.
Patrick, you already know about your warrant, right?
Outrage tonight in Salt Lake City, where police body cam videos show police officers shooting a 50-year-old black man, one with live bullets, another with a stun gun, as he runs away.
In August 2017, what began as a minor bicycle stop in Salt Lake City, Utah, ended in a fatal shooting that would spark outrage and protests across the city. It was the kind of encounter most people wouldn't think twice about. A police officer pulling someone over for riding at night without proper lighting. But within minutes, the situation spiraled into a chase, a burst of gunfire, and a life cut short. Patrick Harmon, a 50-year-old man, was stopped by an officer who noticed he was riding his bicycle across multiple lanes of traffic without a red rear light. What seemed like a simple citation quickly became more serious when officers discovered Harmon had an outstanding warrant. As they attempted to arrest him, Harmon appeared emotional and distressed, telling officers he was trying to deal with the warrant. Then, instead of complying, he suddenly took off running. Body cam footage captured the officers chasing him down the street. The sound of footsteps, heavy breathing, and shouted commands filled the recording. According to police, Harmon threatened them during the pursuit, allegedly saying he would cut them while holding a knife. Investigators later reported that a knife was recovered at the scene, but the video told a story that many viewers interpreted differently. As the chase continued, one officer could be heard shouting from a distance. Then, without warning, 3 shots rang out. Harmon was struck from behind as he ran away. He collapsed face down on the pavement, groaning in pain while officers moved in and handcuffed him. A taser was also deployed during the encounter, adding to the confusion and chaos of the moment. He was rushed to the hospital, but he did not survive. When the body cam footage was eventually released, it ignited intense public debate. Some officials and prosecutors said the shooting was justified, arguing that the officers believed their lives were in danger. The district attorney later ruled that the use of deadly force was justified under Utah law. Others, including members of Harmon's family and civil rights activists, said the video showed a man trying to flee, not attack. To them, it looked less like self-defense and more like an unnecessary use of deadly force. Protests erupted across Salt Lake City, with demonstrators demanding accountability and questioning how a stop for something as minor as a missing bike light could end in a fatal shooting. The case drew national attention, especially amid broader conversations about police conduct and racial disparities. Because of the public pressure and the seriousness of the case, the district attorney even requested a federal review by the FBI to ensure the investigation was fully examined. In the end, no criminal charges were filed against the officers. Still, the footage left a lasting impact. For many who watched it, the most troubling part was how quickly everything escalated, from a routine bicycle stop to a man lying motionless on the pavement. It's a moment that continues to raise difficult questions about split-second decisions, the use of force, and how encounters that start over the smallest violations can end in tragedy. In July 2010, the United Kingdom found itself glued to their television screens as a nightmare unfolded in real time. What started as a breaking news alert quickly turned into a nationwide manhunt, with entire towns locked down and armed officers sweeping through quiet countryside roads. For days, viewers weren't just watching the news, they were watching a tragedy build second by second, not knowing how or when it would end. It had all begun only 2 days after 37-year-old Raoul Moat walked out of Durham prison. In the early hours of July 3rd, he arrived at a house in Bertley, Gateshead, where his ex-girlfriend Samantha Stobbart was staying with her new partner, 29-year-old karate instructor Chris Brown. Moat didn't knock on the door. He didn't call out. Instead, he hid outside in the darkness for more than an hour, waiting. When Brown finally stepped outside, Moat fired a sawn-off shotgun at close range, killing him instantly. Moments later, another blast shattered the silence as he fired through the window into the house, striking Samantha in the arm and abdomen. She was rushed to hospital under armed guard, clinging to life as surgeons fought to save her. But the horror didn't end there. Only hours after the shooting, Moat handed a 49-page letter to a friend, a rambling manifesto filled with rage, justifications, and chilling threats directed at the police. And he wasn't done. Shortly after midnight on July 4th, Police Constable David Rathband was sitting in his patrol car near East Denton, Newcastle. Minutes earlier, Moat had called the police himself, announcing what he was about to do. Then, without warning, he approached the vehicle and fired twice through the window. Rathband survived, but the attack left him permanently blinded. His life changed forever in a matter of seconds. By then, the country was on edge. Moat had become the most wanted man in Britain, and the police response was unlike anything seen in modern times. More than 160 armed officers were deployed. Reinforcements poured in from across the UK. Armored anti-terror vehicles rolled into the region. Sniper teams took positions across hills and forests, and even a Royal Air Force jet equipped with infrared surveillance scanned the countryside from above. The search soon focused on Rothbury, a quiet town surrounded by dense woodland that Moat knew well. Suddenly, everyday life came to a halt. Schools were placed under armed guard. Residents were told to stay inside. False sightings triggered dramatic raids across the region. On live television, viewers watched helicopters hovering over rooftops, armed officers patrolling empty streets, and roadblocks sealing off entire communities. It felt less like a police search and more like a war zone, and it was all happening in real time. Then, on July 9th, the story reached its final, terrifying chapter. Police located Moat on a riverbank near Rothbury. He was alone, holding a shotgun to his own head. For nearly 6 hours, negotiators tried to talk him down, while media crews reported live from behind the police cordon. The entire country seemed to hold its breath. At one point, officers fired an experimental long-range taser, hoping to save his life, but it had no effect. Then, at around 1:15 a.m. on July 10th, the tension snapped. A single gunshot cut through the silence. Moat had pulled the trigger himself. He was rushed to Newcastle General Hospital, but it was already too late. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The aftermath left deep scars. Samantha survived, but with permanent injuries and memories that would never fade. Chris Brown's family mourned a life taken in an instant. David Rathband spent nearly 3 weeks in hospital, trying to adapt to a world without sight. 2 years later, still struggling, he took his own life. In the days that followed, the country was forced to confront uncomfortable questions. Had the rolling, round-the-clock coverage turned a violent fugitive into a spectacle? On social media, disturbing groups appeared, glorifying Moat and romanticizing his crimes. What began as a police manhunt had turned into a national obsession, raising serious concerns about the line between reporting the news and sensationalizing tragedy.
Stop right there! Stop! Stop! Get on the ground, both of you! Lay down on the ground!
In January 2016, what should have been a routine police call in Mesa, Arizona, turned into one of the most haunting body cam incidents ever captured. Officers were responding to a report that a man had pointed a rifle out of a hotel window. Inside that hotel was 26-year-old Daniel Shaver, a pest control worker from Texas, in town on a business trip. He had been drinking in his room with 2 acquaintances, showing them a pellet gun he used for work to remove birds from grocery store ceilings. At some point, the gun was seen near the window, and someone called the police, believing it to be a real firearm. Within minutes, the hallway outside his room filled with armed officers, their rifles raised, treating the situation as a potential active threat. When Shaver and the woman with him finally stepped into the corridor, the atmosphere was tense, almost suffocating. Rifles were pointed directly at them, and the hallway echoed with sharp, urgent commands. The woman was taken into custody without harm, but Shaver was left alone in the corridor surrounded by guns and flashing lights, with multiple officers aiming at him from just a few feet away. What followed was a series of rapid, complicated instructions. Cross your legs, don't move, keep your hands up, crawl toward us. The commands came one after another, sometimes changing mid-motion, leaving little room for error. Shaver, clearly terrified and possibly intoxicated, struggled to keep up. His voice trembled as he pleaded, "Please don't shoot me." He was crying, crawling on the carpet, trying desperately to follow every order exactly as he heard it. Then, in a split second, everything went wrong. As he crawled forward, Shaver's hand drifted toward his waistband, possibly just trying to keep his shorts from slipping as he moved. In that moment, one of the officers believed he was reaching for a weapon and opened fire with an AR-15 rifle. The shots echoed down the narrow hallway. Shaver was struck multiple times and died almost instantly. When officers later searched the room, the only weapon they found was the pellet gun that had triggered the call in the first place. The body cam footage was not immediately released, and for months, Shaver's family pushed for it to be made public. When the video finally surfaced, it shocked viewers around the world. Many were disturbed by the confusing commands, the fear in Shaver's voice, and how quickly the situation escalated into deadly force. The officer who fired the shots was charged with second-degree murder and manslaughter, but after a lengthy trial, a jury found him not guilty. He was later briefly rehired by the department, which allowed him to qualify for a medical retirement and a monthly pension. Civil lawsuits followed, and years later, the city agreed to multi-million-dollar settlements with Shaver's family. Despite the legal outcomes, the footage continues to circulate online, often cited in debates about police training, use of force, and body cam transparency. To this day, the case remains one of the most controversial police body cam shootings ever recorded, an incident that left many people asking the same haunting question. How did a routine call end with a young man begging for his life on a hotel floor? It was the morning of August 25, 2021, on the A3003 near Andover, Hampshire. For 28-year-old Alex Britton, the day had already taken a turn. Her car had broken down in lane 1 of the dual carriageway, a stretch of road with no hard shoulder and nowhere safe to pull over. She was a mother of 2, engaged to her childhood sweetheart, and planning a wedding that had already been delayed by the pandemic. That morning, instead of thinking about venues or dresses, she found herself stranded in the middle of traffic, waiting for help. It didn't take long before someone noticed her. 58-year-old delivery driver Tina Inns pulled her food delivery van in behind Alex's car. She parked deliberately to shield her, creating a barrier between Alex and the oncoming traffic. Then she stepped out, ready to help a stranger in need. Moments later, a third person joined them. Tom Watson, a 30-year-old recovery truck driver, was heading to another job when he spotted the breakdown. Helping stranded motorists was part of his work, and without hesitation he pulled over and got out to assist. Now, 3 vehicles sat in lane 1: Alex's car, Tina's van, and Tom's truck. To anyone paying attention, the danger was obvious. But one driver wasn't paying attention at all. A 9-ton lorry approached at around 56 miles per hour. Behind the wheel was 39-year-old driver Mihail Kopanyars, delivering bottled water to a depot in Andover. From his seat, he had about 170 meters of clear road ahead, more than enough distance to slow down or steer away from the stopped vehicles. Yet the lorry never slowed. Investigators would later uncover the reason. For 7 minutes before the crash, Kopanyars had been watching a Facebook video on his phone. He had even shared it with someone while driving. In the final seconds before impact, he was typing directions into his sat-nav app. His eyes weren't on the road. They were on his screen. His dash cam captured everything. The 3 stopped vehicles grew larger in the frame, hazard lights flashing. The lorry plowed into the vehicles with devastating force. Alex Britton, Tina Inns, and Tom Watson were all killed instantly. In the aftermath, instead of immediately cooperating with police, Kopanyars reached for his phone. He snapped it in half and threw it into the roadside undergrowth, hoping to destroy the evidence. His dash cam recorded the act. Police later recovered the broken phone. Forensic analysis revealed the truth. He had been watching and sharing a video, then typing on his sat-nav, all while driving toward the stopped vehicles. At first, he claimed his brakes had failed, but investigators quickly disproved that. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison and banned from driving for 10 years after his release. But for the families, the sentence offered little comfort.
This is some of the dashcam video the prosecution played for the judge to try to convince him to keep Mustafa Al-Jaziri behind bars. It shows the moments before his car crashed into oncoming traffic.
It was April 5th, 2023, in Dumfries, Virginia. Inside a 2007 Chrysler 300, 33-year-old Dorothy Dayan Horton, her boyfriend Mustafa Al-Jaziri, and her 5-year-old daughter Empress. To anyone outside the vehicle, it looked like just another car passing through traffic. But inside the car, tension was building. Dorothy sat in the front passenger seat. Little Empress was in the back. The argument between Dorothy and Mustafa had started earlier that day, and by the time they reached the area near Fortuna Center Plaza, the mood inside the Chrysler had grown heavy. Voices were raised. Words were sharp. Witnesses would later say the two looked locked in a heated exchange just before the crash. Driving in the opposite direction was a 46-year-old woman in a Chevrolet Suburban. She was simply heading south, focused on the road ahead, unaware of the storm brewing inside the Chrysler approaching her. To her, it was just another stretch of road, just another oncoming car. Then, in the final seconds before impact, something changed. Dashcam footage from a nearby vehicle captured the moment. Dorothy's face suddenly shifted. The anger was gone, replaced by fear. Pure, unmistakable fear. Her lips moved, and later, lip readers would say the words were clear. No, Empress is in the car. It was a desperate plea, a final warning, a mother's instinct in the face of sudden danger. Seconds later, the Chrysler drifted across the center line. It didn't jerk or spin like a driver trying to correct a mistake. It moved steadily, directly into the path of the oncoming Suburban. Investigators later said there was no evidence of hard braking, only light pressure on the pedal, not nearly enough to stop the collision. To them, it didn't look like an accident. It looked like a decision. The crash was violent. Metal slammed into metal. Both vehicles spun from the impact. The Chrysler was thrown onto the sidewalk, while the Suburban came to rest facing the wrong direction in traffic. Debris scattered across the road. Inside the Chrysler, Dorothy and Empress were critically injured. Neither had been properly restrained. Dorothy wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and Empress hadn't been secured correctly. Both were rushed to nearby hospitals, but despite the efforts of doctors, neither survived. In the Suburban, the driver was badly hurt, but she lived. Mustafa was also injured, though not critically. He would walk away from the crash alive, unlike the two people sitting beside him just moments before. Investigators began piecing together what had happened. Sergeant Chad Mason later testified that the lack of skid marks showed there had been no real attempt to stop the car. The worst damage was concentrated on the passenger side, exactly where Dorothy had been sitting. To investigators, that detail mattered. 2 days later, on April 7th, police arrested Mustafa at his home. He was charged with 2 counts of manslaughter and 1 count of malicious wounding. Dorothy's brother, Derek, spoke through his heartbreak. In a single day, he said, he had lost both his sister and his niece. The rest of Dorothy's children had lost their mother. A family that had once been whole was now shattered. The pain spread even further. Divine Fontaine, Dorothy's estranged husband and Empress's father, struggled to speak about his daughter. He remembered playing tea parties with her, putting on tutus just to make her laugh. Those memories, once sweet, now felt unbearable. In court, prosecutors painted a dark picture. They said the dashcam footage showed intent, that Mustafa had used the car like a weapon. They compared his actions to someone pulling a trigger. They pointed to Dorothy's terrified expression and the steady movement of the car across the center line. To them, it wasn't panic. It was deliberate. The defense told a different story. They argued Mustafa had simply made a terrible mistake while trying to pass another vehicle. They said Dorothy's final words were just the reaction of someone sensing danger, not proof of intent. A tragic crash, they claimed, not a calculated act. But prosecutors pushed back. They introduced additional claims, including an accusation that Mustafa had threatened a jail guard, saying he knew her address. They said it showed a pattern of dangerous behavior. His family denied the claim, calling it illogical, but the judge sided with prosecutors and kept him in custody. In the early hours of March 23, 2020, a desperate phone call for help turned into one of the most disturbing body cam incidents of the year. Daniel Prude, a 41-year-old man visiting his brother in Rochester, New York, was in the middle of a severe mental health crisis. He had been acting erratically, reportedly after using PCP, and had already been taken to a hospital for evaluation earlier that night. But only hours later, he ran out of his brother's home and into the cold, dark streets, confused, frightened, and completely naked. His brother, terrified for his safety, called the police, hoping they would bring him back alive. When officers arrived around 3:16 a.m., their body cams captured a surreal and unsettling scene. Prude was standing alone in the street, unarmed, naked, and clearly not in his right state of mind. an officer approached him with a taser drawn, repeatedly ordering him to get on the ground. Prude complied without resistance, lowering himself onto the cold pavement and placing his hands behind his back. Even as he was handcuffed, he spoke softly, saying, "Yes, sir," and murmuring prayers under his breath. It was the kind of moment that seemed tense but manageable, until everything began to unravel. Minutes later, Prude grew agitated. He started shouting, spitting, and asking for a gun. Officers responded by placing a spit hood over his head. Through the mesh, he begged them to remove it, his voice rising in panic. Then he tried to stand up. Within seconds, several officers forced him face down onto the street. One officer pressed down on his head with both hands. Another pushed a knee into his back. A third held his legs. The body cam audio captured Prude's voice, strained and desperate, repeating a chilling phrase, "You're trying to kill me." The restraint lasted more than 2 minutes. At first, he moved and spoke. Then his voice faded. His body went still. Officers continued to hold him down even as liquid came from his mouth. For several moments, they talked among themselves, seemingly unaware that his breathing had slowed or stopped entirely. Then, someone noticed. His chest wasn't moving. He was unresponsive. Paramedics rushed in and began CPR right there on the pavement. The body cams captured the urgency, the sudden shift from control to panic. Within minutes, Prude was loaded into an ambulance. His heart briefly started again, but the damage had already been done. He had suffered severe oxygen deprivation. A week later, on March 30th, he was taken off life support. He never regained consciousness. The medical examiner ruled his death a homicide, caused by complications of asphyxia during physical restraint, with a drug intoxication listed as a contributing factor. But for months, the public knew nothing about what had happened. The body cam footage stayed hidden while the country erupted in protests after the death of George Floyd. It wasn't until September that the video and reports were finally released to the public. When people saw the footage, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Protests filled the streets of Rochester night after night. Some demonstrators sat naked outside City Hall, hands behind their backs, wearing spit hoods to recreate Prude's final moments. Others marched, shouted, and demanded accountability. The images were haunting, and the questions were impossible to ignore. How did a call for help end in death? Why did a man who complied with officers end up face down on the pavement, struggling for air? Political leaders called the video disturbing. Community members called it murder. The police chief and several top officials eventually stepped down as the pressure mounted. Yet, when the case went before a grand jury in 2021, no criminal charges were filed against the 7 officers involved. For many people, the outcome only deepened the anger and the grief. What remained was the footage itself, a chilling, real-time record of a man in crisis, whispering prayers on a cold street, and the slow, tragic moments that followed. It's a case that still lingers in the public memory, a stark reminder of how a call for help can turn into something far more devastating than anyone ever expected.